I think there's a good starting place for anyone who wants to get deeply into spirituality. And that is to ask yourself, to explore the question, what is consciousness? The ancients in the West didn't talk about it much. Western philosophy didn't talk about it until the advent of Hume, Bishop Berkeley, and Kant. Kant was probably the richest source of our investigation of consciousness back then. And now, when it comes to exploring consciousness, it's all about brains and brainwave patterns. And what consciousness is in terms of something mechanical or electrical. But there's something far more important to explore. The feel of consciousness itself to us as individuals. And what consciousness reveals. And what we think it reveals, but it doesn't. And we can see that mostly we really don't know what consciousness is. Or whether what we see and hear and taste and touch is a true representation of a proposed world that stands by itself, and whether our sensual creation of it through consciousness, the information our eyes give us, our ears give us, our nose gives us, our touch gives us, smell gives us, and taste, has anything to do with what the world really is like in itself. And does it matter? Now, I've been focused on consciousness for a long time. To me, these questions are fundamental. Whether the world exists outside of consciousness, or like the movie The Matrix, each of us are living in a life-supporting pod with machines keeping us alive and creating a conscious framework within which we dream the Matrix. And what our hero tried to do in the Matrix was explore the Matrix itself and to escape it. Because in the Matrix, he was trapped in a world created by captors. And which was ruled by agents which enforced the rules of the matrix. And anyone that discovered that the matrix was not real in the sense of being what it really appears to be, had to be blocked and hampered from expressing that to others. The so-called decision to take the red pill versus the blue pill. The blue pill, you stay in the subjectivity of the matrix imposed by the machines. The red pill, and you break loose from that matrix they created. And what you become then is up to what you want to be. You can fly when you're free from the matrix. You can do many surprising things. But we're always brought back to the life of the body. If the body's killed, you no longer participate in consciousness, including the matrix created by the machines, which determine our conscious experience. In a sense, all spiritual people nowadays are aware of this dilemma. Is the world as it appears to us real? Or is there something entirely different outside of what we can see, hear, taste, touch? Because it's obvious we don't know the thing in itself ever. We know what our senses show us. And from that, we infer by logic and by the body of science that's based on logic and observation and experimentation to understand the world as we think it lies underneath, so to speak, the world that we experience. It's more fundamental than the world we experience. And understanding this world leads to extraordinary things like radio and television, nuclear physics, atomic explosions, space rockets. Aren't we having a wonderful time now? The mind creates so many different things. But it doesn't know what consciousness is. No one knows what consciousness is. A lot of people state high things about consciousness. Like Robert, when he states you're not a body and a mind, you're consciousness itself. And this consciousness is elevated to a state of godhood and even beyond. This is good. Isn't it good to find out that you're God? But unfortunately, even gods die in Robert's world of consciousness, and that we are consciousness, the totality of consciousness, the beginning and end of consciousness. But we end, the body ends, unless we believe in heaven or hell, purgatory, or some other place for our consciousness to be kept safe while we seek a new body. You see, this is quite a rabbit hole to go down. We always want to know how the story ends, rather than the story as it is in the moment. We think that the story as it is in the moment is too what shall I call it, flaky to bet one's life on. What you see, hear, taste, and touch may be similar to what I do. But in order to make that true, we have to believe that we have similar senses, intuiting or experiencing a real external world, as opposed to being in a cocoon where machines, where God creates a world around us that we get to know through our senses, and it has to demand a certain degree of trust in what our senses and our minds reveal. But what if we can't trust any of this? What if this is all just supposition? What if there is no real reality somewhere buried in this common matrix of experiences we all share in? Would a 21st century Plato have anywhere near the same philosophy as the 5th century BC Plato had? I doubt it. But it's getting to the place we don't know shit about what consciousness is. And if we're lucky, we take up a hobby, if we don't have to work for a living, of gardening or peaceful meditation, or living on a boat somewhere in the Caribbean, going from island to island, dancing the rumba, or whatever we want to do in the Caribbean, including pronouncing Caribbean, like I always was taught to pronounce it. So what's to know? Well, in 1995, after Robert left Los Angeles and went to Sedona, I felt quite abandoned and lonely. So almost all day long, I did nothing but listening to Yogananda and Muktananda and a few other chanting tapes. That's all I did. When I was out walking, I'd go for walks. I'd have my little tape player with me and would listen to the chanting. Some of it exquisitely beautiful, others not so much. But my mind was always fixated on my consciousness, my object of meditation became consciousness, which is really hard to do because if you meditate on consciousness, you're not meditating on the world around you as it appears, because that's what consciousness shows us. But it's not consciousness itself. So, what is the medium of consciousness? And this means you have to pay attention in yourself of how consciousness comes to you, what is conveyed by consciousness, and how is it that consciousness leaves you? This is all I did. Tried to become aware and separate this into some sort of understanding. This is something I should have been doing for the 6 or 7 years up to that point while I was with Robert in Los Angeles. And instead, I waited for him to leave and go to Sedona. Now, I wanted to go to Sedona. I even suggested I would. I thought I was going to. But in fact, back then, Sedona was a pretty small place. There were no jobs there for assistant gurus who wrote about Robert and translated his transcripts into written word. And the one guy who promised me a job driving a Jeep for tourists at the last moment flaked out and said, "Ed, you're too old to drive a Jeep." Well, subsequently, he went to a mental hospital. So I guess he got his for lying. I should make that the backbone of my teachings. Don't lie to Ed. You get kicked in the ass by reality. But instead, all I did was listening to chanting all day. And it quieted my mind. And with a quiet mind, I was much better able to be aware of the comings and goings and the so-called vicissitudes of consciousness. Does anybody know what's real? what is true. Because look at it. Consciousness comes to us in what appears to be a 24-hour time period. And during 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours of that, we're asleep. And there's no more consciousness. We're totally unaware of the world. Although at times we may create an inner world, which we call dream. And there do all kinds of sort of things, often unconnected with what we can do in the waking matrix. But one thing I became really, really aware of is that in the morning, as I was becoming awake, I became aware of the fact that I was aware of consciousness arising in me. It seemed to be like a light in my gut that arose through my thorax into my neck and then into my head. And once it reached my head, the world of nothingness and darkness disappeared. And I was in the world of the living, of the external world, knowing what situation I was in. Knowing my name, knowing what I had to do that day. Isn't it true for all of us that if we want to be, we can become aware of consciousness coming to us when we wake up in the morning? It's not an instant process. It's a process that takes a few seconds, and one we can thwart by refusing to allow ourselves or consciousness to come into our brain. And that way we can sleep an extra hour. But when an alarm goes off, the awakening process is very quick. It's startling. It's like we don't know where the fuck we are for a moment, like we're hit in the head with something. But we become almost instantly aware of where we are, and it's time to get up. We have that startle reaction where we wake up to this prosaic, mundane reality. But back then, I was just watching consciousness. And I could watch it coming to me. And it rose up out of my gut. It flowed upwards through the heart, the throat, into my head. And once it got into my head, the totality of the world appeared, along with me as being an apparent individual within that large world. And so for the next 15, 16, 17, 18 hours, I would remain in this world before I allowed myself to let tiredness overtake me And I could watch that consciousness fading. And once it drained out of my head, I was aware of nothing anymore. I wasn't really aware of my mind settling or consciousness settling down inside of me, like a reverse of when I woke up in the morning. But I understood consciousness was something that came to me. I was the host, and it was a guest. So what was I without consciousness? That I could never know, because all knowledge is contained within consciousness. You get how profound that understanding is of that which we are not conscious. We can personally have no knowledge, although we can take knowledge of scientists or philosophers and then repeat that word for word. What they say is left over, just like philosophers talk about consciousness. To this day, we don't have the slightest idea what consciousness actually is. We're talking about the interface between physical reality and consciousness. But that we are conscious, that we are a sentient being, is a miracle. And we should become a master of consciousness, in the sense we know what it is and what it isn't. That is, it isn't an escape from an unimaginably horrible world. As a matter of fact, that unimaginably horrible world is the world we have in consciousness. So what we settle for is a kind of resignation. It's a shitty world filled with danger and death, birth, pain, pleasure, suffering, exaltation. That's sort of without rules about what brings happiness, and instead rules about survival in this matrix. And we find out through Buddhism in our own living that the less we expect out of this matrix, this world we live in, the less we desire, the less we want, the less we assume is true or not true, and just let it alone, the more peaceful we get. We're really screwed until we get to the point where we let go of the reality of the conscious world and think of it as nothing but an expanded dream. And what happens in it isn't so important anymore. And we don't try to force our dreams to go anywhere. We just sit doing nothing and wait for consciousness to unroll through us. But we don't pay any attention to consciousness anymore because we've stopped exploring, wanting, desiring to understand. And we just let the world alone, which is what Robert taught. Don't care what's happening in the world. Don't try to change it. Don't struggle to get something extra. Don't struggle to get happy. Let all your dreams go, all your aspirations go. Become very passive. Accept what arises. And you'll be happy. And that's true. But deep down inside, we think or we feel that we're a sucker. We live according to the way Robert says, as we don't know any better for ourselves. And we look to wise men and women to tell us what to do and what it all means. So I leave you with this. Not that we're ending satsang, but I leave you with this. Watch consciousness. Not the events that you see and hear and taste and touch in consciousness, but try to perceive consciousness itself as the medium by which the world is conveyed to you. And realize that what consciousness is conveying to you may not be real. I think this is what Robert means by you're not real. The world is not real. It's an optical illusion. And there's one thing for sure. Most of our sensing of the world takes place through organs in our head, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste. Only all of the rest of our body has a kinesthetic sense, which is a tactile sense of what's happening inside of our body, such that when we feel pain inside of our body, we seek to remedy it. When we when we find exaltation or great happiness in us, when we accomplish something or do something, we just want to repeat that over and over again. And that's where sex comes in. And with that comes offspring and subsequent generations of human beings, none of who know what the hell's going on. And they all traipse off to wise men if they're not just into the matrix and learning how to dance to the matrix demands and imperatives that are built into human society. There are certain things a lot of people want. In some countries, all that they want is to be more comfortable, to have something to eat, to have shelter and clothes. Other countries, you want more, bigger houses, better car and to show off to everybody what they have. So pay attention to consciousness. That's all we ever know is consciousness, except a few of us, by paying attention to consciousness all the time, are able to watch consciousness come and go. What does that teach us? It teaches us that consciousness is a fickle thing. It's not permanent. It's ever wavering. And the world that it points out to us is ever changing. It changes minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, week by week. It's never the same. So is consciousness the same, consistent? Well, not really. We can see when consciousness arises in us. It's not the consciousness that we're aware of once we become fully awake. But when we become fully awake, the reality we find ourselves in consciousness, it too, it's not permanent. It keeps changing and changing. Now, what are we doing? We who seek to understand ourselves, understand God, the divine, make of all this. In some sense, I think most of us are seeking some certainty about what the world is, but we know that really there's no world, there's only our conscious representation of the world. So within that understanding, what do we know about ourselves for certain? What are we? Are we beings living in a human body, surrounded by sentient beings and insentient dirt, insentient space, insentient everything, including insentient energies? Are only living organisms sentient? Do the mountains themselves have any sentience? Does the world itself have sentience? And if so, how do we know? How do we prove that or not prove that? Is the world alive outside of us? And what we should be doing is searching for what the world wants. And we'll find so many different teachers that teach that. Ecologists, scientists, philosophers, philosophers of peace, ecologists who say the world is on the edge of being destroyed, and we have to do X, Y, or Z in order to prevent it from happening. And then we get involved in a warfare to change the way the world works. We become an activist, obsessed with how the world is and now how it has to be different in order to save itself from some fate that someone else has said is going to happen at the end of the day after tomorrow unless we change our ways. You know how complicated the world of human beings is. are. You can go on the internet and find 100 news sources, from the New York Times to Bloomington to God knows what else, with the story of the day. Something happening here, something happening there. Most of it's for our amusement. Some interesting fact about some celebrity. Some political leader somewhere dies or starts a revolution. Or the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. So what do? Shrug our shoulders and say, along with Alfred E. Newman, say, what? Me worry? This is what Robert tells us to do. What? Me worry? And that we reach a divine state of happiness by not caring what happens to the world or even to our bodies. A lot of people would find this unsettling, to be so passive. But not Robert. He taught happiness comes from not being interested in the world and what consciousness reveals about the world or about ourselves, and instead be indifferent to education, be indifferent to the truths that are fostered upon us or foisted upon us, or both. Just become a simple fuck. No more worrying or thinking about God, enlightenment, the Supreme Court, the war in Ukraine. And even when these things touch you, a war comes here. The South secedes again from the Union, and we're engaged in a world-class internal war. What, me worry? Don't take sides unless you have to. Be like these cowboy movies where the hero used to be a top gunman, a top officer of the court, a top sheriff, or a top bandit who has mended his ways and lives a peaceful life until some wise ass malcontent comes along and tries to force him or his family to do something that wasn't peaceful anymore. And then watch him get all bent out of shape and go to work destroying these people. And now it's all peaceful that he's destroyed the bad guys. It's a nice tale, but it's a tale about the hero who rescues the world from evil, whatever that evil is, whether it's Christendom or Buddhism or whatever. Really, to be happy, you just have to Relax. Don't be too caring about the outcome of anything. And instead, just be aware of who and what you are, what your body feels like, and what to do if your body feels upset. You just allow it. You try to change that. But as long as you hold on to big principles, like equality for all, under all circumstances, or something like that, or Nazism, or communism, and you're a devout communist, you will always be displeased and upset by the world and be striving to make it into a communist world or a Nazi world because you think you're fighting the divine battle for truth, justice, and the true American way. So we come to the conclusion of what I'm trying to say. Don't try to figure things out. Don't hold on to concepts. Just relax and do what you have to do in your daily life to stay alive and have a relatively comfortable life. But don't worry about the big processes. Whatever ideas are walking the earth, attracting followers. Just drop those because they're like acid. They bite you, constantly bite you, and force you into making decisions which make you more and more uptight, trying to get them to change or to be more like what you want. What you really want to do is to know yourself at the most fundamental level. Not know the world with its upsets and its teachers and its politicians, but to know yourself. To know yourself so purely and so strongly that you're utterly unmoved by what happens in the world. Because that stuff can't touch you if you don't care about it. And thus the monk was confronted in his own temple by an invading general who was offended that you didn't greet him and bow to him because he was so important. And the general says, "Don't you know who I am? I could cut you down in one stroke with my sword." And the monk, barely responding, still sitting in half lotus, almost not paying any attention to the general, says, "Apparently you don't know who I am. I could be cut in two without any notice whatsoever, without any upset whatsoever. because he was okay with whatever happened, which was a kind of exaggerated story. I mean, it's to teach a point of view. It would have been even better if he had pulled out a pistol and shot the general with the sword, because he had more advanced weaponry. And then we'd have a whole new holy book. So instead of saying, you don't know who I am, I could be cut through and not be bothered at all. And instead, he pulls out his ancient revolver and shoots the general 3 times in the chest and goes back to meditation, leaving it to his students to get rid of the body. Now, wouldn't that be a laugher to put in historical perspective? Starting a whole new religion around that? If that proper self-defense mitigates any need to relax. And it would say, just relax, but keep a revolver close by. So if anybody disturbs you, blow them away. This would be a new code for an advanced Buddhism. Be relaxed and passive until someone pisses you off and strike them down. Now, in my world, if someone tried to take away or hurt my cats, I could respond very violently because I love them beyond belief, and the pain that it caused me to lose them is much more severe than the pain caused by killing them. So pay attention to consciousness. Read all of the spiritual books like Nisargadatta. On self, consciousness, and self-realization. Read Ramana. Read Robert. And most of all, read yourself, which means you give up all books for that time period. You become aware of what happens in the morning when you wake up. This means you do it so often, practicing, and most of the times realizing when you came awake that you weren't really watching at all, that it sort of surprised you. But you just keep doing it and keep doing it. And one day you'll be able to watch the arising of consciousness in you. The same thing with consciousness going away. But I urge you not to start with watching consciousness as it goes away, because following consciousness with your own conscious watching it can really hinder falling asleep. And that's another thing. How am I as a body aware of coming consciousness to me? Until it comes, and the world appears in that consciousness. Who is it that it appears to? Consciousness is only a carrier of sense data. It's not the thing in itself. So who is it that was watching consciousness come and go until consciousness came into my head, and it appears, and the world appears, the totality of the world with sound, sight, smells, location, time. All of these things are in consciousness, but they're not in me when consciousness is not there. So who is it that is able to see that or be aware of consciousness is coming to me? It's coming up my body. So there's something in me that's aware of consciousness as something coming to me. What is that thing? Because that's what I really am at the base. He or she that is aware of consciousness coming to me and can become aware of consciousness when I'm awake in order to understand the nature of the comings and goings of consciousness, as well as what consciousness does when it's fully functioning within us. Our path is set. Instead of trying to understand the world, we try to understand consciousness, and not merely consciousness as an abstract thing, but our own consciousness as it comes to us and leaves us, but also as the medium by which the world is revealed to us. Watch how variable consciousness is depending on our state of mind. If we're tired, we perceive the world and the objects in the world in one way. And if we're highly energetic, in an entirely different way. Consciousness is pretty variable. So be aware of consciousness. Let that be your homework for the next 20 years. What is consciousness? Be aware of it. Be aware of its coming and going. And recognize that you're there somewhere in your body or near your body when consciousness comes into your body and can watch it rising within you until you suddenly become fully awake. Now, what the fuck is that all about? Who's the one that watches consciousness coming? Because it's not consciousness itself, because you can see the totality of consciousness as a distant light, sort of. A ball of light and energy that arises in your gut and goes into your head. And you don't see the world until it gets into your head. How is that? You'll be amazed at what you can discover by watching your awareness of consciousness. Not only consciousness itself, but watching consciousness as it goes through the day. What am I outside of consciousness? Am I only aware of myself inside consciousness? Is there a second kind of consciousness that's aware of consciousness coming? An awareness, let's say. An awareness that when something is presented to it through sense data, perceives a world? Am I awareness itself, raw awareness? So that whenever consciousness in whatever form comes to me, that awareness appears to a world, or world appears to it. So the ultimate subject, what I really am, is awareness. An awareness that when consciousness comes to it, the external world appears. This is a heavy, heavy, heavy topic. You solve this for yourself, and you become a teacher. When you know this from the bottom of your heart, completely, this consciousness, not your body anymore. You don't give a shit about your body. It's consciousness you want to understand, because everything that's important to you happens in your consciousness. If you died during your deep sleep, you'd never know about it. All that you know about is what's in consciousness. So study consciousness. Study its coming and its going, and what you're like without consciousness. Is there some kind of different consciousness in you and awareness that when consciousness is gone, you're still aware of something, like the coming of consciousness and the going of consciousness? Is this some sort of splinter off of consciousness? Or is this something entirely different? Awareness, being different from consciousness, but is aware of consciousness and unconsciousness. And is this not world of no consciousness more fundamental than the world presented by consciousness? Isn't nothingness underneath the world of perception? And that the true world, the permanent world, is the one that's there before awareness is there. And that what the basic is just awareness, even if it's not aware of anything, whether it's in a silent state or a non-active state. And it's not active because there's no medium of a consciousness being there. Do you know how deep this stuff is? What we're talking about now? We're talking about fundamental life. Because all that we know is in consciousness. Except sometimes we can watch consciousness coming to us and disappearing from us, and be aware for moments of the disappearance of consciousness and being in total darkness with no sensations whatsoever. It's rare, though. As a matter of fact, each of you will go through a period of playing with the coming and going of consciousness. I did it for a long period of time. Waking up in the morning, I could stop the awakening process and go back to sleep, then take charge and wake up again slowly, and then stop it before I became fully awake, and practice that for a long time. I don't know how long, because time isn't consciousness, and a lot of time I wasn't conscious. But I was able to control comings and going of consciousness to that awareness. And you should all be aware of that as a possibility, to think about it, be aware of it, and to try to be aware of waking up in the morning. And if you can, going back to sleep. And when you try to wake up again, be aware of that process of becoming awake and stop it and go back to sleep into nothingness. And going back into nothingness, what do you experience? This is the fundamental things that all teachers talk about. And most of them don't get that deep because they give you a belief system about heaven and hell or freedom or not freedom or something like that. They really don't talk about the comings and going of consciousness. And who is it that's aware of the coming and going of consciousness? Now, somebody please ask a stupid question. No bright questions are allowed. Stump the guru, as Robert would say.
Benji, was Robert always in the absolute? Was he always in pure awareness? I mean, I think what we have is God manifest as humans is awareness of awareness, which means that we can see consciousness. And I don't know where my question is going. I think I keep trying to make it simpler than getting so lost in the machinations of it. I simply try to look at it as pure awareness and pure subjectivity that we.
You're making it too complicated.
Yeah, I somewhere in there, before I even opened my mouth, I was further ahead. So I think I'll go back to that point.
You know, I never knew what Robert was aware of. I just knew what he said. And at sometimes he told us that like consciousness was the highest goal of universal consciousness and God consciousness. But other times, and mostly, he said, you don't exist. The world is a mirage. So what is this thing that's elevated at one time to being the totality of everything and godlike, and at other times that what you see isn't real and what you see about yourself isn't real? So what's he talking about? He's talking about awareness and consciousness. Is he separating them? I think he was, but he never was really articulating that. This is something for you guys to do. Read Kant. It was very hard to understand. Most of his stuff, Critique of Pure Reason, is considered one of the most difficult books to read and to understand. It's available in English. I read it in English a long, long time ago in graduate school. Kant, to me, back then, was my idol until I found Eastern religion more interesting, Eastern philosophy. But Kant codifies these kinds of questions and answers them in this way. The questions were raised by Bishop Berkeley and Hume, Hume. So you read those first. They're called the empiricists. What appears? What is? While Kant is a transcendentalist. he talks about what the appearances mean. So I'm going to destroy a few minds that might follow my advice and plunge into Western philosophy and then into Eastern philosophy and then into themselves and say, oh, fuck, I can't understand this. So I'm going to look at myself. And that's the proper way to go. Because that'll take you someplace besides understanding. It'll take you to realization of deeper truths than you'll hear from anybody else. I see I've lost about 6 or 7 people during this satsang.
And I've got a question. So consciousness, some people like Course in Miracles says that you can have your conscious world be wonderful. And you've got that choice. You can have it wonderful or hell. So he's basically saying that you can have that world as a good world or a bad world, depending on you, on me.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about it? Is there a question in there?
Yeah, there is. Is that possible that conscious world can be this beautiful place?
Yeah, for a time. Then it'll turn ugly. It'll turn on you. Whatever you had imagined, it'll go back to a different way. That's why Robert would talk about something higher than that, which is to be indifferent to whether it's good or bad and to what's happening. Just be indifferent and accept whatever is and sort of smile at it and think, oh, it's dumb, but what the hell, that's the way the things are.
Okay.
Why try to be happy all the time instead of just relaxing? And if you're just relaxing, you'll be happy all the time. You won't have to think about such things. Is this real or not real? Yeah, you'll just be accepting of whatever is. Robert would say, well, why would you want to fight to make something one way or the other? Instead, just relax and let them fuck you over. Well, you won't care. You'll be like the monk confronted with the general. And he'll say, I can be fucked over and it won't matter to me. Now, isn't that a safer bet? Then you can make the world better or you can make the world worse, depending on your frame of mind. What if you have no frame? Neither good nor bad, either happy or unhappy. The thing is, when you're this accepting of whatever is, generally, you're pretty happy. But if you have to work to change unhappiness into happiness, you have to do a lot of work and figure out how it's done. How do you change unhappiness into happiness? It may be a matter of choice, but you still have to figure out what do you do in that choice. And that means you're always working. Instead, you join Alfred E. Newman and say, what me worry? And then you go hug your cat or pet your cat. My little darling is up there, the new guy, the Snow White guy. I can't believe how much I love him already. And he likes Karima better than me. I can't believe it. I have to get a cruel cat that likes me better than him. But in the meantime, I love this guy with all my heart because he's so precious and innocent. He's so gentle. But he's active as hell. He runs around the house, bowling things over. Things go flying. But with the other cats, with us, he's so gentle. He doesn't appear to be frightened by much either, but he's careful. But he's a real winner. Any other questions, comments?
I still have 1,000 pages of Robert's transcripted satsangs to read, and I still go back there because I still believe in that pure invited trip. It's why I keep coming back, and I know what I've said. Why I love you is because you brought. Not everybody went 180 degrees, and you brought it 180 degrees back to the marketplace with such a clarity and such power that it's really exquisite. But yes, you can get lost in Robert with some of the terms and the landscape and so on. But if you just read it, it's so pure. There's something about it that, I don't know, it just seems to, my takeaway is to not talk about it, which I'm doing now. So if I were smarter, I would shut up, but I need words, as we all do from time to time. But yeah, I find his words are exquisite, and your blog, when you started it, it's not real, every word. All the matriculants, all the devotees who went through your satsangs are remarkable in their takeaways and their givebacks. And I still treasure all of the emails that you sent me from Steve Eckert. I read them because that's a dance, that's to invite a masters in a dance that just blows me away. So that's exquisite.
Let me ask you, do you ever talk to your wife about this?
Yes and no. On some level, I think she's more advanced than me. She comes, I don't know, it's hard to say. Most of the time, I can't broach this in the family because they have other situations. My wife still works 12 to 14 hours a day, 6-7 days a week with the television Showtime networks. My son is absolutely, he's in paroxysms of distress. He thinks the world is ending. He wants to go somewhere else where it ain't gonna get any better. And I can't talk him down off the windowsill, figuratively. And yet, if he were to listen to like this satsang, or if he were to read Robert or try to read Nisargadatta, and I wouldn't start with Nisargadatta necessarily, because for all the years that I've been studying this, it only gets clearer now. But no, I don't know. Again, you can't proselytize. My takeaway is very quiet. It's like when Robert said if he went to speak to people in the street, they'd probably stone him. In this part of New York City, there are a lot of smart people who are aware and who understand this and probably have a spirituality that's very deep. But to answer your question, no, this is for me. But I would share it, and I do. When I go out, I share it, and I try to share it when I understand the dissolution point. So. Well, I love you, and I love what.
Thank you.
I
Love you too.
Really, you as Siddha Rameshwar said, just worship the Guru. What that book that he wrote is so exquisite. When he explains the 4 states of consciousness, the what is it, the first body, the flesh and whatever, I can't think of the stages, subtle body. You can help me out on that because I've forgotten.
I don't remember it
My
either.
brain shut down on that one. But anyway, yes, his
Siddha Rameshwar is so much clearer than Nisargadatta.
very clear. very clear. Anyway, yes. I read it.
What's the name of the book with all of his writings in it? It's supposedly a book about supposedly a book about, but I forget.
That
Big,
tone,
thick book.
yeah, I have it in the other room. Right, it's 300 or 400 pages, small type, and thank God you wrote your self-realization and other awakenings in absolutely huge type, which I love because I don't have to read it with my reading glasses on. But somebody probably
I had you in mind when I decided that large type was good.
large type. That book is one of the gentlest reads. I just keep rereading it because it coalesces everything from so many different spins, interpretations, whatever, because of because of your journey. And when I sit here among the rest of us after you go and we try to figure out where we are and who we are and what we are, I just try to remind everyone, and I'm only reminding myself when I say most gurus spent 40 years in the wilderness and then were reluctant to teach. And then we're reluctant to bring this message back, but there seemed to be an imperative, and that's the gift. And that's what Siddharameshwar articulated. And you have and do. And yes, there are words, but your words come from consciousness, pure consciousness. And that's what's absolutely, maybe mesmerizing is the wrong word, because I think there's a clarity that would belie that in a sense, but the words are exquisite, and there is such a clarity, and that's why you are abiding and descending grace and joy and bliss in every satsang, and that is what I love you for, and that's why I'm crumbled and crushed and just. You are my beloved, and I love you for all of that, for all of those words and joy and bliss in every satsang. Every satsang is a Shaktipat sadhana.
I love you too.
Thank you, Reggie.
Got one more topic to cover. Mark, you've been with me a long time now. You've been claiming to know everything that I say for few words now, for years now. Are you ready to be a teacher? You already teaching?
I think in a sense I'm already teaching. I have my limitations as a teacher, which became apparent to me early on, which is mainly in communicating and verbalizing and conceptualizing the inner worlds and the inner states. But I think I am ready in my own way, to the degree that I can, and I think I'm already doing it in some capacity.
What did my talk today do for you? Did it do anything?
I've heard a lot of these things before. You did touch upon a few things, but I think you're being a little bit unfair to Robert. And we've had discussions before about what Robert said and what did he mean by it, and you didn't seem to understand. And I've reached the conclusion, maybe, like in my opinion, maybe you're too close to Robert to see him in a different way. But for example, when Robert says, you're an illusion. Yeah, you are an illusion because your mundane self is totally an illusion. The idea that you're this person and that's all that you are is totally an illusion. So on that level, it does make sense that he's negating the obvious barrier to self-realization. He's starting off with the basics, right? You're the illusion, the world is the illusion. So the world is real, but the way that we typically perceive it is totally illusory, totally subjective and full of false assumptions. And it's again, the identifying with the person, with the world, is totally a barrier to the depths of the self. So on that level, it does make some sense. Doesn't make sense literally. It makes sense as a teaching tool. So I don't want to talk too much.
Vesselina, I know that recently you're getting increasingly pissed off about the intellectual environment you're in, being in graduate school, medical school, and seeing the people around you as virtual clowns that talk about nothing but medical career. What are you thinking now about your own situation?
For the record, I haven't called them clowns. That's your words.
What's that?
I haven't called them clowns. That's your words.
Yeah, that's my words. I think your term for them probably is more like assholes,
Yeah.
except you didn't use the term asshole.
It's just people I don't feel pleased with. And I don't feel well. Well, I don't know it. I feel like or I forgot what I was going to say. I don't like to feel separated all the time. Like I feel the sense of separation when I talk to my friends in the medical school, because it's like we're always after something, to like get something, to achieve something, and it's always like you don't want it ever to slip away, like the success or the goal to slip away, and you always have to be, I don't know how to explain
Ponder that.
it. Yeah.
Chris
So-
and Bernadette, you seem to be in a stage of flowering, both of you. Do you feel like you're flowering, either of you?
Yeah, I feel way different than I used to, and I'm just so glad I ever came here. I feel like I won the lottery or something. I just feel like you have turned me inside out, and I'm so grateful. I have you're in my heart and always will be. I just feel so much appreciation and love. Thank you so much.
I feel that. I feel that. What about you, Chris? You look so solemn.
I don't want to talk. I don't feel like talking right now. Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Just feel good.
Well, screw you and your sister too. Ian, what about you?
Oh, wow. It's just so lovely to hear people speaking here of their experiences. And I'm not going to read Kant. It's a Kant of an idea. I don't want to read any more books that challenge me. I've got a shelf full of books, and I'm not looking at any of them. It feels really good.
Yeah, good.
So screw you with your Kant and all those other dudes. Bishop, whatever his name was, he's dead and gone.
Broccoli.
Yeah, no, don't want to do that. And Mark, I really related to what you said. I see that, yes, the illusion is in my mind, and I see that that my glimpses of the true world are so valuable and so beautiful. They make my life worth living. Ed, every morning I'm in that state you talk about where I'm choosing whether to wake up. I'm choosing whether to, turn on the illusion, switch on, pull the lever to get the matrix going, or what do? I'm not a sort of person that sleeps in, but I have been sleeping in, and it's delicious. It's gorgeous, and then I'll just wake up and I choose to wake up. I choose to bring in consciousness, and oh boy, it's lovely. So yeah, and I still go through shit, and I still have decisions to make almost every minute of whether I decide to be in pain or to, as Cassie said this morning, ho-hum. Ho-hum is a very high state, I think. So yes, I'll echo everyone here and say thank you, Ed, from the deepest part of my heart. I love you so much.
Love you too. You're obviously more enlightened than Chris is.
I'm sorry.
Now
Okay.
he's learned to shut.
I just didn't feel like talking at that time. Now that I give you the finger, I feel bad.
You should. One time I snapped at you, Ed, and I cried for 3 days. Long time ago.
I didn't do it out of hate or anger or anything. I was just playing. I hope you realize that.
Sure.
Right back at you, man. But I just want to, I was so in a state where I just didn't feel like talking. But
It's all right.
then after I did that, I feel all sweaty.
Can we have a group finger now?
Sure. Let's all do fingers.
Yeah.
Oh, that made me feel better. Like I said, you took me somewhere today in this meditation. It was just this wonderful place of nothing.
Yes.
And then you called my name and I just, oh God, I don't want to talk. And so I gave you the finger instead. But now I'm all worked up and blabbering like a madman.
Let's mute.
Let's mute.
Hey, Jay, this is for you. Cassie, this is for you.
Oh, we're still recording. That's a good one. This will be a keeper. Okay, let's see.
Vasily, this is for you, Vasily. This is for you, Vasilina.
Oh, as I said,
We
I don't know
had
what
two
I said.
cats. We had both of our cats laying on us. It was such an amazing experience today. I mean, I could feel you, Bernadette, and the cats was just so wonderful.
Yeah.
But, I disturbed that by my feelings.
I know what it's like.
Okay, so it's no fun if you go off camera and give you the finger. So that doesn't count. So I just thought I'd let you know that I'm not giving you the finger, but it wouldn't matter. And now I'm giving you the finger, but it still doesn't matter because I'm still off. Okay. Now I can come back. Okay.
Hey, Ed, why don't the cats sit on your lap?
I've got a computer on my lap.
Ah, no wonder. They can't sit on
I
that.
got a tiger on my shirt,
Oh, that scares them off.
and the tiger is looking at little Eddie.
Oh, look. That's adorable. That's adorable. Yeah.
And I'm sure Vasilina will have a cat right there. No?
I was showing, look, my cat is reading.
Oh, cute.
See?
See. And finally, we get a reaction out of Michael, who's glad to see Vasilina's cat because it's his cat too.
Yeah. Did you see her?
Mhm, I did. Oh. Okay. I'll see you all, at least some of you, next Wednesday. But let today's talk get into you deeply. The subject matter you want to explore is, what is my experience of consciousness? And if I can become aware of consciousness coming to me, what is it that's aware of consciousness coming? Because all that I ever know is within consciousness, but this apparently might be outside of consciousness. Who is it that's aware? And what is his status? His status is obviously beyond consciousness, which means beyond the world of existence and non-existence. What does that make him or me? Ponder these things, as Robert would say. Ponder them. Okay, take care. I'll see you Wednesday. Leave meeting. Bye-bye.